In this question, we're given the number 39,476 and we're asked to round it off to the nearest 10,000, 1,000 and 100. So let me write this number down. So this is the ones or the units column. This is the tens column. And this is the hundreds column. Now this here is the thousands column. And this is the tens of thousands column. So now we'll look at the last part of the question, where we'll round it off to the nearest 100. And the way I like to do this is I go to the hundreds column and I put a line to the right. Now this digit here is what you call the decider. Now that decides what happens to this digit on the left of this line. There's two rules I want you to learn for the decider. The first rule is if the digit is 4 or less, you leave this digit alone. Now the second rule for this, if the decider is 5 or more, this digit goes up by 1. So we add 1 to this digit. Now the decider is 7 and it's 5 or more. So we need to add 1 to this digit here. So remember this, that's the decider. That decides what happens to this. And because this is 5 or more, we add 1 to this. So the 4 becomes a 5 and these two stay the same. Now I want you to understand this. Everything to the right of that line turns to 0. So the 7 becomes a 0 and the 6 becomes a 0. So now let me remove this line. So there's our number. As before, 1, 2, 3, comma. So this is our thousands. So it's 39,500. Let's look at the second part. We need to round this off to the nearest 1,000. So what we do is we go to the thousands column, and that's there, and we put a line to the right. This digit here is the decider. And that decides what happens to this digit. So the decider here is 4. And that's the first rule. So if it's 4 or less, we leave the digit alone. So we leave this digit alone. This stays as 9. This will be 3. And we said every digit after this line becomes 0. So the 4 becomes a 0. The 7 becomes a 0. And the 6 becomes a 0. So let me remove this to make it a bit clearer. As before, 1, 2, 3, comma. This is our thousands, so it's 39,000. With the final part of the question, we're asked to round this number off to the nearest 10,000. So we go to the 10,000s column, which is here. And we put a line to the right. This here is the decider. And this decides what happens to this digit. So let's have a look. Is it 4 or less? No, it isn't. Is it 5 or more? Yes, it is. And because this decider is 5 or more, we need to add 1 to this digit. So this 3 becomes a 4. And we said everything after the line becomes a 0. So the 9 becomes a 0. The 4 becomes a 0. The 7 becomes a 0. And the 6 becomes a 0. As before, 1, 2, 3. comma. So this is our thousands. So it's 40,000. Now again, there's lots of ways of doing these sort of questions, but what you want to do is try to learn and understand this rule. And then all this you can do in your head mentally.